Tonight we have 5 tales that will surely terrify you. From a potential house invader, to midnight happenings at a train station, a horrible encounter with a hitchhiker, and more. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers for allowing me to share their stories. Without them, this video wouldn't have been possible. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit r/slumberreads, or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I'm in my last year of high school and live in what used to be a pretty big and busy city until the mid-70s. According to the residents at least. I grew up knowing only the almost abandoned looking town I live in. Many of the residents moved somewhere around 1975, and now only around 7,000 or so people remain. We rarely get visitors anymore. Our town isn't even on most maps, and the last time new people moved into our town, they were gone the next week, never to be heard of again. My parents used this incident to make even stricter rules for their little girl, not allowing me outside the house past 4 p.m., even forbidding me to stay the night at my friend's house for the next few months. I was 12 at the time, and the only explanation about the incident my parents gave me was they visited the train station during the forbidden hours. You see, that's the most important rule here in our town. All the adults are crazy vigilant about it. Never visit the train station between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. That's the time the accident happened, on January 5th, 1975. To this day, it's unknown what exactly happened, but a train at platform 13 derailed. At least, that's what they think happened. Witnesses said they saw the train speed past the platform, only to suddenly swerve to the right and disappear. They never found the train, only some tracks leading to a dead end in the neighboring meadow. The next day, platform 13 was gone. Nobody understood why, but after a few days, the residents started noticing some strange things at the station. They only occurred between 12 and 3 a.m. My parents never told me what they were, only told me that they were the reason most people left. Over the course of a few months, it got so bad that the rule was implemented. This all has been pretty normal for me. I never knew any different, so that's not why I'm posting this here. In a town like mine, with almost nothing exciting or new, you could understand I and a few of my friends got bored. We only had a few more weeks until graduation, and after that, we were all planning to move away from this boring little town to some big city. With only a few weeks of boredom remaining, we decided we'd like to know what would happen if we broke our town's rule. Pretty stupid, I know. We should have known better, but we thought it was just a scary story. After so many years of living near it, walking past it almost every day, we only thought of it as a normal train station and didn't see any risk in spending the night there. My town's crime rate is almost non-existent, so the chance we would get into a dangerous situation was very little. I went with my friends, Anne, John, and Michael. Anne and I are friends since first grade, so I trust her with my life. She wanted to finally do something she wasn't supposed to do. She normally is the one who wants to do everything according to the rules, but boredom got us both. John was Anne's boyfriend, so of course he also went with us. He's a bit of an arrogant prick, if I'm being honest, and I don't know what Anne saw in him, but I'm happy she dumped him after our little excursion. With all the crap he pulled at the station, I'm not surprised. Then, there's Michael. He was a friend of John, followed him around everywhere. He's a bit shy and has a younger brother, Cass, who is 14 years old and pretty annoying. Michael got dragged into it by John. Anne and I even helped him push Michael into the situation, and with a lot of convincing from us three, he also went. Last night, we met up at the station. It was 11:45 p.m., just 15 more minutes and we would go inside. Anne, John, and I were already there, waiting for Michael. We all got away with some excuse, mine being that I went to stay over at Anne's. Our parents weren't as concerned anymore as when we were kids. They thought we knew better and let us roam free most of the time now. There hasn't been an accident in the last few years. So I guess the sharp edge of fear had slowly faded, Michael arrived and I already paced a few steps towards him, ready to greet him, when I see someone walking behind him. I groaned, already knowing who it was. "Why did you bring him?" I asked, disappointed. Michael at least looked embarrassed. He caught me when I tried to sneak out. This was the only way he wouldn't snitch on me. Cass looked pretty proud of himself, until John butted in. "Well, if he wants to join us so badly, he can go in first." Cass looked scared for a split second, then he put on an arrogant front. So Big Bad John is too scared to go first. Of course, John, being the arrogant idiot he is, took the bait and stomped to the entrance. "Too scared my ass," he yelled, before running inside. I ran after him. His yell could have alarmed some neighbors, and we didn't need to be spotted heading inside the train station at this hour. The others came after us. The station itself is pretty old. It's also a bit run down, seeing as we don't need it as often anymore. John stood in the pretty big hall. I ran up to him. "You shouldn't have yelled that loud. Someone has to have heard you." I didn't need him ruining our little trip. "Hey, you know how platform 12 is the last platform, right?" John asked, completely ignoring what I said. He sounded a bit scared and disbelieving. That was the only reason I didn't start yelling at him. Instead, I answered, a bit unnerved from his sudden change of attitude. "Yeah, that's how it's always been. Why are you asking that?" "If that's true, then what is that doing there?" he asked. I looked to where he was pointing. Anne answered first. "That shouldn't be there. That's been a normal wall for as long as I can remember." There was a small, dirty corridor, which looked like it hadn't been used for decades. A sign above it read a big 13. Cass suddenly walked towards it. "What's this?" He took a piece of torn and dusty paper from behind a sign on the wall. "If you found this, then you've crossed the only rule you should have listened to." What kind of stupid prank is this? Was my first thought. You can't turn back now. You may have noticed that the entrance has disappeared. There is no way out. I automatically looked behind me, and sure enough, where we first came through, the entrance now stood a blank wall. I noticed how Cass started to look uneasy in every direction, while Michael inched closer to him, as if he was expecting an attack on his little brother at any moment now. To be fair, I also moved a bit closer to Anne. This was making me more uncomfortable than I would like to admit. I've made this list of rules to help you get through the night, but keep in mind that these are my own experiences with the station over the course of only a few days. This list is far from complete. You'll have to figure some things out yourselves, so even if you think you are safe, be careful. I take it you went here with a group, the same way I came here with my friends. Good. You'll need more than one pair of eyes to get you through the night. I'll start with the rules. Stick to them. 1. If you enter the station between midnight and 3 a.m., the first thing you come across may be one of two things. 1. The old ticket booth, or 2. Platform 13. If you come across the ticket booth, follow the rules under the big 1. I'll tell you one thing, you got really lucky. If you come across the platform first, then you have some really bad luck. Follow the rules under the big 2 and stick to them. Your life depends on them. I don't think this is a joke, guys. This was the first time since we got into the train station that Michael talked. I agreed completely, with the wall randomly appearing in the platform there. Anne and Cass both looked scared shitless, so they also believed it wholeheartedly, but John only scoffed. "Of course," he drawled sarcastically, and doesn't even seem to listen as Cass reads the rules. 1. Whatever you do not enter platform 13. You will be tempted to, sometimes even see it as your only escape, but believe me, what you'll find in that platform is far worse than a slow and painful death. 2. If you hear any sound coming from the intercom, hide. A janitor's booth is preferable, but somewhere behind a closed door is good enough. You can come out when the sound stops. 3. Passengers will come walking from platform 13 between 1 and 1:30 a.m. Ignore them. Do not talk to them. They are not normal passengers. If there are more than 10 passengers, hide. Again, somewhere behind a closed door will do. On the original train, were only 10 passengers. Whatever else you see will not be human. 4. Stay somewhere close to the main area. This isn't a rule, but just a piece of advice. Treat it as a rule though. The rules will help you through the night as long as you stay in the main area. I cannot help you if you stray to any other place at the station. 5. Follow these rules until 3 a.m. and you should see the entrance reappear. You will be able to exit, and once you are out of the station, it will go back to normal. I know this is very little to go on, but I have little information on what to do when the platform appears. It only happened once when I was here, and let me tell you, it was not pretty. These rules are your lifeline. I hope, even though you are stupid enough to come here, you at least have enough brains to stick to them. Of course, when Cass was done reading them, we noticed John missing. A string of curses escaped my mouth. That idiot was going to get himself killed. I raced through our options, but decided the only thing we could do was look for him. We needed to get out of here together. How were we going to explain to the parents where John suddenly went? We weren't dumb enough to split up, luckily, so Anne and I went at the front, checking the area in front of us, while Michael and Cass covered our backs. We checked the whole main area, but no sign of John. I was already mentally preparing myself to go check the corridors, when Michael suddenly makes a sound and motions to a shadow slowly coming closer. In the dim light, we couldn't see what it was. Anne takes her cell phone from her pocket and shines a light in the direction of the figure. "Quit shining the damn light into my eyes." Turns out it was John. "What the heck were you thinking? Going on your own?" Anne is practically screaming at him. "Why wouldn't I? Is there something I missed? Or are you seriously stressing about these stupid rules? You really believe them?" He asked incredulously. "Wait, you had a cell phone this whole time? Why haven't you phoned the police or something about this stupid joke?" Anne wanted to retort, but realizes what he said and tries to phone someone. No signal. Great. Anne looks back at John. "Just stick to those goddamn rules, okay? We don't know what's happening, so no harm in following them." She tries to persuade John, but he doesn't want to hear about it. "You'll do whatever you want," he says nonchalantly. I look at my watch. 1 a.m. I open my mouth to warn the others when I see the first person coming from platform 13. John approaches him, but is thankfully stopped in the nick of time by Michael. Michael is bigger than John and easily stronger. Do not speak to them. John, knowing what Michael would do if he didn't listen, complied sourly. Michael may be the shy guy, but if John went too far, he could easily overpower him. That was probably the reason why John wanted Michael as his friend. While Michael and John had their little scene, more people started coming from the platform. When I looked back, I almost panicked, thinking more than 10 people appeared, but a quick count reassured me that there were in fact 9, not 10 or more. They talked with each other and didn't seem to notice us. They looked almost normal, except for 2 things. The first was their clothes. They were obviously from the 70s. Nobody would wear them today. Second was the fact that their expressions were all completely blank. They showed no emotion whatsoever. It didn't take long for them to file out of the main area, and we were alone again. We all held watch, each looking at a different part. We all, except for John, who played games which didn't require internet on his cell phone. Cass and Anne got annoyed at him more than once, but as long as Michael didn't get involved, he just ignored them. It was almost 2 a.m., and we were all slacking off quite a bit. At first, none of us heard the faint cackling sound coming from one of the speakers, until Cass suddenly said, "What is that sound?" While we were searching for John, we found some good hiding places. Michael grabbed John and Cass and raced to the janitor's stall, while Anne and I went to the toilets. We each quietly hid in a stall and waited. The sounds grew louder, the static replaced by a low rumbling. Out of nowhere, something started scratching the door to the bathroom. The rules hadn't said anything about this, but we remained silent, hoping this thing couldn't get through the door. It sure tried to get through, but fortunately, it wasn't intelligent or big enough to open it via the door handle. After an agonizing 10 minutes, the scratching stopped, and after another 5 minutes, the intercom went silent. Anne and I waited another minute to be sure, and then slowly peeked out the bathroom. The door had some pretty bad scratches, but we determined that it was still good enough to hide behind if the sounds came back. When we got to the main area, the guys were already there. Michael was holding Cass, who was obviously freaked out. John sat on one of the benches, white as a ghost. Michael looked at us, then focused back on Cass. Did that thing also scratch your door? Yeah, left some pretty nasty gashes too, Anne answered. Can you still hide in the janitor's booth? I asked. Better to know now, and maybe search for a new hiding spot. Yeah, the door is pretty banged up, but it'll last us through another round for sure. Good. Who knows if they'll come back. What kind of sick joke is this? John stood up and began walking towards where the entrance should have been. I'm heading out of this place. This shit ain't for me. Oh yeah? Michael said, one eyebrow raised. And how exactly are you going to get out of here? John continued walking towards the wall, and when he reached it, he stopped. He picked something up and brought it to us. It was a piece of paper. Not more rules, he whimpered. Give it here. Cass said as he snatched it. He had calmed down somewhat and started reading it. Good. If you found this, you have at least followed the rules. That means there is still some hope left for you. When you are reading this, it is exactly 2:45 a.m. I looked at my watch and, indeed, it was 2:45 a.m. You only have 15 minutes to complete the last test, and then you are free to go. I will tell you, however, this is the hardest part. Just after the incident happened, strange things started happening all around town. The entities from the platform terrorized the town from midnight until 3 a.m. After weeks of these attacks, the townspeople fought back and eventually cornered them into the train station. There, they struck up a deal. The entities would leave them alone and could only appear in the station. The catch was that they could have one person of a group stupid enough to enter between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. This is your last test. Choose one who has to stay. This person has to enter the corridor to platform 13. Choose wisely, but quick. You have 15 minutes. No way. Michael didn't want to offer anyone. I mean, who would want to choose between their friends? Or want to go themselves? I sure as heck wasn't going to go in there. I looked at my watch. 10 minutes remaining. What do we do? Cass sounded scared. We all were. We'll face whatever comes together. I agreed with Anne's idea. John remained silent, only nodding, while Michael and Cass put on a brave front. We stood in front of the corridor. Cass on the far left, then John, Michael, Anne, and I. I counted the minutes, and later seconds, until our time would be up. We only had around a half-minute left, and prepared ourselves for whatever would come out of that corridor when it happened. John grabbed Cass's arm in one fluid motion and, being quite a bit bigger and stronger, threw him off balance, straight into the corridor. I saw his face change into one of horror, and a split second later, I stood in front of the station, along with John, Anne, and Michael. Cass was nowhere to be seen. We stood completely motionless for a few seconds. Slowly, realization dawned on Michael's face, and a deep pit grew in my stomach for Cass's fate. Michael launched himself at John, screaming curses and hitting him with all his strength. I seriously do not remember all the things he yelled at John, but I let him. John deserved it. Neighbors slowly started peeking out of their windows and pouring out of their houses. After a few minutes, quite a crowd had formed on the street, and Michael let John go, who passed out a bit before. Michael kept repeating the same phrase over and over. Why him? Why him? Between sobs. During his outburst, the police arrived. Anne and I were questioned about what happened. Will they let an ambulance take Michael and John away? After we told them what happened, they gave us a long lecture and then handed us over to our parents. To say my parents were pissed was an understatement. When they saw me, however, they reined in their anger and just sent me to my room. I'm now on house arrest until graduation. I tried to sleep, but my mind keeps replaying the events of last night. That's why I decided to post this here, to warn you all. If the townspeople tell you to stay away from the train station from midnight until 3 a.m., please listen. Do not repeat my mistakes. I'm going to try and get some sleep. Maybe now that I've shared my experience, sleep will come better. The following events happened during the early 90s. Some details of the story could be explained by my, at the time, heavy drug abuse. Other details of the story are harder to explain, but for what it's worth, I was a young man working as a full-time musician. The music industry was still in its era where drugs and alcohol were basically considered part of the job. I'm not trying to defend nor justify my addiction. I'm just letting you know my background so you can judge my story for yourself. Oh, and I've been clean for almost 2 decades now. I'm writing this story fully sober. Anyway, I lived in Los Angeles back then, in a 2-room rental near Venice Beach. The place was a disaster. Both tiny rooms were packed with guitars and amplifiers everywhere. You could barely make it from my messy bed to the disgusting bathroom without tipping over at least a couple of guitars. In my defense though, the place had more cockroaches than guitars. The roaches didn't bother me as much as they bothered my girlfriend Linda. She was the only thing in my life that was real. We had been together for a couple of years at least, so she and I were definitely for real. It made perfect sense that she wanted us both to move to a more reasonable and bigger place. I guess she wanted more in life than getting high every night in a bed full of bugs and guitar strings. So, it felt like uncanny sheer luck when a fellow musician, Vince, offered me to rent his house while he'd go on tour for almost a year. The house was really old and peacefully secluded near the forest in the San Fernando Valley. I doubt you could find a straight angle in any given corner of the house. Everything about it was kind of skewed in a charming way. It could use some repairs and maintenance, but it was definitely a dream house for 2 junkies from a cockroach-infested hellhole. The lawn looked like it hadn't been mowed for the past 10 years. The backside of the house had what I suppose was once a garden bordering to the forest. Now overgrown with weed and littered with junk. It would be an understatement to say that gardening wasn't my priority, so I couldn't care less. Don't use the cellar. Vince looked dead serious when he said it. I didn't think much of it until he insisted on it. Sure, there's plenty of room for my stuff, so I won't be needing the cellar. You shouldn't even go down into the cellar. I placed mouse traps and rat poison down there. Not even go down there? Are you storing dead bodies down there or what? Oh, shut up. It's just full of frickin' rats, raccoons, and God knows what's down there. Not to mention rat poison and mold. Not even I go down there. Raccoons? In the cellar? What the hell, Vince? Look, any year now when I save some time to spare, I'll tear it all up and build a studio down there. But it's just dangerous to be there for now, okay? Yeah, sure. No problem. I won't touch your cellar. I began to understand what he meant shortly after we moved in. You could often hear subtle scratching noises below the floorboards at night. I honestly thought it gave the place a feeling of living in the countryside rather than a big city. It made perfect sense. Los Angeles has a surprisingly rich fauna of wild animals like raccoons, deer, foxes, and all kinds of bugs. A lot of them seek shelter from the California heat in sheds and houses. It was in this house where I started worrying about my drug use for the first time. I was snorting coke all the time, and I was popping Vicodin like candy. None of these substances are known for causing hallucinations, but they do cause anxiety and angst when you come down from them. It was in the house I started waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat with severe anxiety and agony. This one night, I woke up and sat straight up in bed while trying to catch my breath. Linda was asleep next to me in bed. We both got high the night before and passed out with clothes on. I tried to gently shake her shoulder, hoping to wake her up. I'm not sure why I wanted her to wake up really. I guess I just felt like I needed to hear her voice, but she was too strung out to wake up. Barely awake myself, I stumbled out into the living room. The TV was still on and illuminated the room in a gloomy light. It was pitch black outside. The huge windows facing the backside garden turned into an ominous mirror in that synthetic light when I tried to look outside. I thought I could barely see dark figures dancing in the garden through the reflection in the windows. That was, of course, just my mind playing tricks on me. I knew that, but it didn't exactly help my growing anxiety. I was on my way back to the bedroom when I heard that scratching noise again, from the cellar. It was even more distinct and vivid than usual. It almost sounded like long claws of some strange animal, trying to get through the walls down there. I could feel the hair in the back of my neck stand up. I was scared. Vince had been talking about raccoons. This was something much bigger than a raccoon. I stomped the floor as hard as I could. So hard I could hear the glass in the kitchen cupboards rattle. The scratching noises stopped immediately. For a second, it was so quiet I could hear my own heart pound. That silence was suddenly interrupted by a terrifying sound from below. I don't even know how to describe it. Possibly like a mix between a bellowing cow and a dry growl. At least it wasn't the sound of a rat or a raccoon. I can't think of any animal that would make that sound. I freaked out. Completely. I'm just grateful I didn't wet my pants. I ran back into the bedroom and closed the door behind me. I literally jumped into the bed. My anxiety felt like black tar in my veins as I tried to shake Linda awake. She finally woke up and blinked as she was trying to understand what was happening. "What the hell? What are you up to?" she asked. "There is something strange down in the cellar." "What? Strange how? What are you talking about?" "Some frickin' animal or something." "Calm down. Have you been down into the cellar?" "Screw that. I'm not going near that place. I heard something really screwed up from down there." "But, like, what did you hear?" "Scratching. Like long frickin' nails or claws. And then something screamed." "Screamed? That must be a burglar." She sat herself straight up in the bed with a worried look on her face. But this was no stupid burglar. As far as I knew, you couldn't even get into the cellar from the outside. And what burglar would break into the cellar of a house hoping to find anything valuable there? "No, I don't know what I heard, but it wasn't human." "But you said someone screamed." "Well, more like a roar." "A roar?" "Yeah, or maybe a growl. It did sound really screwed up anyway." "From the cellar?" "Yeah, just come look." Linda sighed and reluctantly followed me to the living room. We both stared into the floor where I heard the noise. It was all silent now. She kept looking for a minute before she gave me a suspicious look. "Look, are you sure you didn't take anything strange before you went to bed?" "What do you mean strange?" "I don't know. Maybe you decided to try LSD or something like that." "What the hell? Do you seriously think I would be dropping acid like some stupid hippie?" "Yeah, okay. Calm down. I can't hear anything from down there now anyway." "Something really creepy was down there though. We can go down and check it out if it makes you feel better." "Oh, hell no. I don't feel like wrestling a raccoon in the middle of the night." LSD is a pure hallucination-inducing drug. I never understood the fun in that. It was really popular among hippies back in the 60s for spiritual guidance and whatnot. They figured they reached some higher level from speaking to purple eagles from outer space. I wouldn't dream of going anywhere near that stuff, but I get it. Considering my apparent state of mind, she had to ask. I wasn't sure if Linda believed me about that night. I couldn't really let the whole thing go for weeks to come. I thought I heard scratching and claws all the time. What I heard that night was no rat. The drug started to make me paranoid. I couldn't stop thinking about Vince telling us to stay away from the cellar. It didn't seem too unlikely that he was hiding something down there after all. But I was fortunately too lucid to call him and ask. I didn't want to make a fool of myself ranting about screams and claws like an idiot. Tried to keep it real though. He most likely didn't keep dead bodies or secret nuclear weaponry in his cellar. He would, of course, never have let anyone rent his house in the first place if that was the case. So, I decided I should just go down and check it out. The cellar reeked of mold and stale air. It was surprisingly empty down there. I saw some old suitcases in the corner, and an old refrigerator that looked as if it was from the 40s was sloppily pushed against the wall. I almost felt like I was in a bad horror movie as I was sneaking around in that dank cellar. There was a drain in the center of the cellar, with a missing grate, which seemed utterly stupid. It wasn't too strange at all if rats and all kinds of creeps lived in the cellar, and the room had a perfectly open drain. The drain was about 12 inches wide. Any raccoon could easily climb through that hole. I kept looking at the dark hole in the cellar floor, while trying to figure out where to get a new grate or lid for it. I guess I could have called a plumber, but that sounded expensive, and it wasn't even my house. so I had no intentions of paying for that. That old refrigerator looked heavy enough though. It felt like it weighed nearly 100 pounds as I pushed it from the wall and over to the drain hole. I kind of felt silly afterwards for freaking out over that thing. It wasn't strange at all if things were making noises in the cellar with an open drain. Vince must have been a frickin' dumbass for not doing anything about it. He did say not even he would go down into the cellar, but still. I let the whole thing go until a couple of nights later when I suddenly heard a rumble down there. It was almost the sound of thunder. It was in the middle of the night, but both me and Linda were awake in the living room. She froze up as she was putting her cigarette to her lips. We just looked at each other. We both heard the sound this time. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. "I told you there's something strange down there." "That was no rat." I looked at her with my arms stretched out in a "I told you so" gesture. I quickly explained the drain in the cellar and how I covered it with a refrigerator. "An open drain? Can rats really climb up from a drain?" she asked wearily. "Of course they can. They can even climb up through toilets." "No way." She looked really worried about that fact. "Come on, you must have heard of that before." "But not while you're sitting on it, right?" "I don't know, probably not," I said with a calming voice. "Are you sure? Why the hell are we even discussing rats? That was no rat." "What if it's really a burglar this time?" she whispered. "How? You can't even get into the cellar from the outside." "Maybe he got in through the drain." "No way. The drain is like 12 inches wide." "Go down and see what it is then." "Me?" I asked in a pitch way too high. "Yeah, you're the dude. This is your job." "What the hell? Shouldn't we call the cops?" "We have the house full with drugs, you idiot." She was right. The police wouldn't show up for noises in the cellar, and even if they did, they'd be more interested in our illegal substances than make-believe burglars. I had no choice but to act brave and go down into the damn cellar. I found an old hammer lying around Vince's tools. It was better than no weapon at all. Linda was kind enough to go with me right behind as we walked down into the cellar. The dank smell of mold was thick as a bricked wall. Linda even covered her face and nose with her palm. It was all quiet down there, but I quickly realized what made the rumbling sound before. The refrigerator was sloppily pushed against the wall again. We went back to Venice the very same night, and I went to rehab very shortly after. It was just a regular Monday night. At least, that's what I thought before it happened. I was waiting for the last train to come after a long day of work. Being a corporate slave with minimum wage, along with the 2-hour commute, proved to be quite tiring. The train station was empty. Apart from the old beggar sleeping in the corner, and the overhead lights that did nothing to the freezing temperature. I looked at my watch to see what the time was. It was 11:30 p.m. I could hear the loud noise coming from a mile away, and proceeded to walk to the platform. As I hopped in the train, I was relieved that the entire passenger car was empty apart from one person. I took my seat next to the door so that I could at least take a nap. One of the perks of having a workplace 2 hours away from home was that I can rest in peace, accompanied by the calming silence of an MRT train. I looked over at the woman diagonally opposite from me. Being the only other person in this train struck my curiosity, so I glanced in her direction, as I was usually the only person to ride the last train. The woman looked like she was in her mid-20s. From what I can tell, she seemed to be wearing a white, long-sleeve polo shirt and a black skirt. Her hair is around shoulder height, and I can see a mole just below her right eye. I can faintly see eye bags from behind her light makeup. Even with the effects of not-so-good sleep schedule, could not hide the charm of her alluring auburn-colored eyes. The more I looked at her face, the more I find her attractive. I soon took my eyes off of her, because before I knew it, I had been staring for a few minutes now. Her head turned slightly towards my direction, and she gave a somewhat tired-looking smile. She then stood and sat down at the seat opposite from me. I was a little bit startled due to the woman changing her position. Another thing that felt off to me was I swear I did not see her blink. Her smile remained, with her eyes fixated at me. I thought to myself that she was just getting back at me for staring at her a few minutes ago, but something deep inside told me that wasn't the case. An air of unease filled the train car as the woman quietly stared. Her motionless manner caused me to look away. I decided to shrug it off by trying to sleep. My brain unconsciously made me take a peek while feigning sleep. She was still there, staring endlessly. I never found it creepy, just a bit weird. After a few minutes, the woman crossed her arms and legs and leaned back. "Sweet dreams, staring man," the woman said. I was a bit startled, but not surprised due to my stares from before. Felt kind of obvious. The woman was smart enough to know I was checking her out before, so I doubt my fake sleeping was going to get me anywhere. I decided to sleep for real. The train had always sounded loud whenever it was passing a tunnel. I took this screeching-like sound as my alarm and opened my eyes. Chill went down my spine as I saw the lights of the train were off. The woman was nowhere to be found, and the tunnel lights outside were the only things keeping me from being blind. I could feel something was wrong here. I tried to move, but my body was tense, yet numb. I couldn't move. I looked around and saw them, figures with glowing white eyes. Varying tattoos with different shades of red glowed as well. Suddenly, whispers echoed throughout my head. Those whispers quickly grew louder as the silhouette approached me. The loud whispers, along with the screeching sound of the tunnel, made my ear drip blood a little. With nowhere to run, I panicked and closed my eyes, hoping they wouldn't come near me. Just then, the noise stopped. I felt my ears were cleared of any trace of blood that was there earlier. My body felt an intense pain from opening my eyes again. My legs felt like they could give out if I stood, even just for a second. My arms felt sore, my chest felt heavy. My head, which was just fine before I slept, now aches and throbs whenever the train does a slight swaying motion. It was unbearable. I tried to fix my posture, to see if it will lessen the pain, only to hear cracking sounds from my joints. The woman's arms and legs were still crossed, but she was fast asleep. I looked at my watch to see that an hour had passed. The map from above the doors tells me that the next station was my stop. My legs still felt like giving out, but I just went with it. I stood and walked out of the train, but before I could go any further, the woman spoke. "Hope I'll see you again, Mr. Roberts." Her voice, along with the fact I heard my name from a stranger, immediately made me stop and turn around. Train doors closed, and the lights flickered. Just before the train left, I saw a glimpse of the woman in the dark. A mark with a dark shade of red glowed around her abdomen. Wings, similar to that of a gargoyle, formed behind the woman. Her head now has horns coming out of them, and her eyes, that had a tinge of reddish brown, now became glowing white. I was filled with shock, causing me to stay in place. The train lights became steady, and so, the train left along with the woman who gave me a parting smile. You already called the police. I can't do much now, as I bleed out on the floor. But you're here to help me write this story, so that's all that matters. Baby is my killer. Peachberry was my mom's. This isn't going to make much sense right now, but I can promise you this is the truth. Let me start from the beginning. Then, you can take over the rest. I'll admit, I should be embarrassed by how many stuffed animals I have. But I'm not. They all protect me in different ways. They have their own ways on how they protect me. Some protect me while I dream, others protect me while I'm awake. Being yelled at by mom, being neglected by my family. They listen to me. I'm not allowed to have a diary or even hide things, but I'm also not allowed to have feelings. At least, my stuffed animals allow me to have feelings. I stopped counting how many stuffed animals I had after 30. I couldn't help myself. Build-A-Bear was my favorite stuffed bear store. They have so much variety and they always had something new every week. Of course, Ty was a close runner-up. However, I had a much more magical experience with Build-A-Bear, even though their rituals were weird. I wasn't entirely sure why we had to jump up and down and kiss their hearts. After all, don't they know we already love them? It's not like they're just going to magically turn alive either. I was addicted to making these bears, stuffing them, putting their hearts in them, washing them, and dressing them up. I thought it was cute that they got their own little house to go home to. I always threw those boxes out, but I never threw away their birth certificates and keep them all in a drawer. A drawer that's getting hard to shut now. My stuffed animals surround me in my room. It's comfortable like this though, overflowing on my bed, with barely enough room for me to fit, many more sitting on my desks and making homes on the floors. You just had to choose a spot, and there would be a Build-A-Bear there. Unfortunately, I do have favorites. I know it's wrong, but I try my best to not do favoritism. I rotate the bears every month. Every month, different bears get to sleep with me on my bed and watch as I sleep. I know it's wrong to do favoritism, so I always make sure they have their turn. I'm so thankful I have a king-size bed. Just thinking about them brought a smile to my face. Are you even listening? You can't keep doing this. If you fail school, where will you go? You won't be able to get any scholarships. FAFSA will stop supporting you. I'm about to stop supporting you. I was rudely brought out of my trance. My mother was screaming at me again. That's just like her. I just got out of classes, and she decides to yell at me. I'm not failing. I'm doing fine. I retort back. She doesn't understand. Then how do you explain the phone call I got from the school? She demanded, her angry glare digging into my eyes. What call? What are you talking about? I pushed my bag off my shoulder, letting it fall to the floor where I stood. I'm so embarrassed. You just met me. We were going to study tonight and my mom pulls this crap. The school called today. They're about to kick you out if you don't go to your tutor. You need to grow up. Take responsibility for your work. I'm not going to help you pay for school if you aren't going to take it serious. Did she just... But tuition is $10,000. I can't pay that by myself. Well, maybe you should get a job and stop lazing around the house. What are you even doing? You're up in your room all day. I'd expect you to be studying, but you aren't. What are you doing that's supposedly more important? I gritted my teeth. I wasn't doing anything. I was doing my work the best I could. I am studying. I growl out. You must have felt so embarrassed. I'm so sorry for her behavior. Then why are you failing? How are you failing if you are studying? She just doesn't get it. I am studying. I promise. I'm studying. I'm working my ass off for school. What does she do all day? She doesn't even have a real job. I go to my room, making sure I snatch my bag from the ground and slam my door behind me. She can't tell me what I am doing and what I'm not doing. I throw my bag beside my bed, throw myself on the bed. She doesn't understand. She never went to college. How could she judge me? I'm not even failing. My professors love me. I drifted to sleep and woke all tucked in bed, cuddled next to my stuffed animals. I smiled, meeting the face of one of them. Thank you. I whispered to the stuffy. Perhaps you will understand, yeah? I am working hard at school. It's not like she has a job. It's not like she went to college. I'm working as hard as I can. I wrapped my arms around the stuffy. The thoughts of earlier, the scene plagued my thoughts. I can't believe this. My mom actually suggested I drop out of college. How dare she? I'm the only one that works hard in this house. She doesn't do shit. I think you left, but I'm not sure. I'm not paying attention. I'm so glad I have you. I tell the stuffy and slowly sit up, letting the stuffy fall from my arms and make my way downstairs. No sound, no footsteps, sounds of cooking, or the sound of my mother. She must be out. She's always out at night. Only Lucifer knows where she is now. I roll my eyes. She couldn't even make sure I was fed. I start making myself mac and cheese, and then I start to wonder, if my bears could talk to me, what would they say? Surely they'd comfort me, but what would they do all day when I'm out at school? I suppose I'll never get that answer. I sit my food down and look for silverware. Looking around the kitchen, I realize that Mom's changed the layout of the kitchen. I'm annoyed. She always does this. Now she puts all the silverware in different places. The knives, spoons, forks, and elsewhere. Where could they be? I huffed a little bit before grabbing a fork from the drying rack. At least these don't move. I sit and eat. I can't wait to get back to my room. I love talking to my stuffies. My stuffies always know how to comfort me. I eat as fast as I can and then go back to my room, a smile on my face as I change into more comfortable clothing, laying down and looking at my stuffies. I hold one. What would you tell me if you could? I whisper to it. Silence. I sigh. And more silence. Of course, even if they could, why would they? The silence gets to me and I lay my head on my stuffy. I lay in the silence. I hate silence. A scream from a woman. Where did it come from? The scream cut off. Was that right outside the front door? No, that's impossible. I cry out, though my breath is short. I can't breathe. I open my eyes wide. Maybe you deserve better, but you're so fucking selfish. My breathing feels restricted, yet my chest is rapidly going up and down. Baby? A grin on its stuffed face grows, it seems. That's such a stupid-ass name. I look between us, a knife in its paw. I quickly get up. The knife is still in my stomach. Call the police, please. I manage, as I see your figure in the corner, stumbling out of my room. You were on the phone. I assumed you were calling the police. Getting help. It hurts so bad. I scream. Baby latched on to me, the knife so close to my throat. I fall to the floor, blood staining my shirt. I choke. Please, no. Why are you doing this? You were my favorite. You don't play favoritism to something you can't love. I'm so thankful you're here to watch this. I'm sorry. You just met me and now you're seeing me die. Those are my last words. And you were there to watch the rest. You were there to clean up some of the mess. Make it look like you weren't even there. Just a bystander who heard a few screams. When the cops got there, there was blood everywhere. 2 bodies on the surface, but as they checked the entire house, there were much, much more bodies. Most of them laid out in the guest room, the room where the eldest slept. 2 more where the mother slept. Most were in the basement. The house reeked of piss and shit and iron. The house is now condemned, and you were there to watch it rot. They say the devil is in the details. Well, the truth is in the details too. You can tell when somebody is making up a story when the details just aren't there, or when there's way too many of them and they don't quite fit all together. That's why I can't tell anyone about this. Even if I wanted to hold back, it's been so long, bottled up inside me, I wouldn't be able to stop myself from saying everything. And if I did that, well, they'd cart me right over to the nearest asylum, probably in a wheelbarrow. No sense wasting valuable unleaded gasoline on a complete lunatic, after all. I like to think all of us have a story that will never tell another living soul. Those moments of our lives when something is so unexplainable and irrational occurred that we try to tell ourselves it never happened, or I must be remembering it wrong. Sometimes just 20 minutes after the fact, even though we know that's only wishful thinking. I guess what happened to me wasn't quite as scary as some of the other things people have experienced. Alien abductions, astral projection, ghostly visitations, and a whole long list of other weird phenomena, all of which fit quite nicely outside of the realm of what most would consider reality. I'm not sure if the Hitchhiker fell under any of the above categories. I don't think he does. Somehow, I think he's something else altogether, but who knows. Anyways, since I can't really tell anyone this story since they may decide that I'm completely crazy if I do, I'm going to write it down, and then I'm going to hide it somewhere no one will find it until I'm good and dead. Maybe I'll just throw it out to sea in one of those big corked bottles. I don't mind people judging me as crazy, as long as I don't have to deal with it. I don't want to get locked up in some little padded room in a jacket with no sleeves, being force-fed a dozen brain-tranquilizing pills every day. No, I like my fresh air, and freedom is nice too. So time to get this thing off my chest, at least as best as I can. When you keep something like this inside for too long, it starts to eat away at you. It started with the nightmares. The same one over and over, back in the car with the hitchhiker, and he's smiling at me, with all those crooked plague teeth in his black and purple gums. He's smiling and laughing because I can't stop the car. He's driving the car, and I try to roll down my window to escape from the dead and rotting smell of him. That smell like old, wet garbage mixed with something else. Undefinable, but still vulgar and rancid like nothing I'd ever had the displeasure of breathing in before. But the window is stuck. The door handle is jammed. He's speeding faster and faster and flying around turns, forcing me to hold on or lean clumsily, off balance, into the deathly smell of him. And the whole time he's talking, chatting about anything he can think of that's mundane and boring, as if he doesn't notice that I've pissed my pants, or that I'm trying with all of my being to get away from him, as if he doesn't see me banging the passenger side window with my elbow, all bruised and aching, trying to get it to smash so I can crawl out and tumble onto the highway to my almost certain death. No, he just keeps talking about the weather, how it's not the heat, it's the humidity, and how he really appreciates the ride. And as he smiles, I can see that his teeth are not really teeth at all, but just masses of wriggling maggots, jammed together but still squirming, alive and feeding, and his gums are not really gums, but are fat pink worms instead. He leans closer to me as I notice this and he laughs. But of course that wasn't what happened. Dreams can mix up the details, but they usually manage to create a sense of surreal realism that makes details seem not to matter. In reality, it was me driving. Not that it made any difference. I had no control over anything that day. The steering wheel in my hands did nothing but give me a false assurance and bravado akin to any young man in control of a speeding car, unaware of a patch of black ice just ahead. I was driving through the country, not for any particular reason other than to get out of the house, get some fresh air, and listen to a CD I had just burnt. I was as far out in the country as my usual route took me, driving down a bumpy dirt country road, which led to the paved one-lane highway back to the city. I turned right, towards town when I saw him. He had his thumb out, and was obviously in need of a ride. Now, I'm not one of those people who like to think the worst of everyone, but on this day and age, I'm a little paranoid about picking up just anyone in my car. I mean, pretty much everyone I meet on a day-to-day basis seems slightly too all the way crazy to me. Why would I want one of those fucked up strangers in my car with me? So he can pull out a knife and carjack me? Or bore me with the unnecessary details of his life? No thank you. Maybe 30 years ago, but not today. People are just too fucked up these days. Also, I like my time alone on my country drives. It gives me time to think, and I find that I actually do some of my best thinking behind the wheel of a speeding automobile. I've come up with some of my better ideas on my country drives. I didn't want this smelly stranger getting in the car and messing with my chi, or whatever you want to call it. So I continued driving. As I passed him, I saw that I made the proper choice. His clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in years. His faded blue shirt and pants were dirty, stained, and wrinkled, and I was fairly certain I could smell him even from inside the car. His hair was mangy and looked oily and unclean, sparse on the top of his head. His weathered and worn face looked like that of a 70-year-old heroin abuser, and his sharp, bird-like features reminded me somehow of a gypsy. And he was smiling, an almost invisible smirk of a smile, but a smile nonetheless. The overall impression I got from the man was indefinitely creepy. He looked like he had been standing there for a while, waiting for me. I drove by him with a glance in my rearview mirror. He turned as the car passed him, still smiling and holding out his thumb, despite the fact I didn't want to give him a ride, and there were no other cars around. Then, although I can't be sure, it looked like he brought up his index finger and flicked it against his thumb. The second he snapped his fingers, my car lost all power. The speedometer needle began to drop down from 60 to 50 to 40 to 30 until I was stopped and pulled over on the side of the road. At that moment, I was already more than a little bit scared, but when I glanced back in the mirror, I saw the hitchhiker walking towards my car, and my heart really began to hammer. I could feel the beat of it throbbing in my neck and forehead. Then it seemed like my heart seized up for a moment, and I had to calm myself down with gentle, soothing thoughts about how everything would be alright. This was just a hitchhiker. He wasn't some demon, just a friendly old man who needed a ride. The snapping of fingers and my car's sudden meltdown. Well, that was a little weird, but maybe I had just thought I had seen him do that. Maybe it was just my shitty car being its shitty self. Hello, thank you for stopping. I was waiting for a long time. I jumped a little when he spoke through the rolled down window on the passenger side. It seemed like he should have taken longer to walk the distance to my car. I could have sworn he had been a good 100 yards away when I had looked in my mirror just moments before. Lunatic thoughts rolled around in my head, like a brief cyclone, then was gone. Demonic visages in mirror may be closer than they appear. The rearview mirror, warning label from hell. You might need to wait a little longer, I said, pretending this was a normal human being, although, even then, I was clearly sure that he wasn't. My car broke down, seems like. It just, I don't know, gave out on me. He opened the passenger door and took a seat, as if I had invited him to. He kept his leg hung out the door casually, and for that, I was grateful. Maybe he would take the hint and leave me alone after all. Oh, I wouldn't worry about it. The car these days are very reliable. He said with a voice that probably sounded similar to that of a snake telling Eve that the apples are really very tasty. Most of the time you can just turn it off and turn it back on again, and it'll be good as new. Give it a try. I had never heard of such a practice, but I was intrigued enough and frightened enough by him to attempt it. As I turned the key, he snapped his fingers and said, "Bingo, bango, tango. See? Just like I told you." It took me a moment to realize it had worked. The needles on the display all bounced up from their nap and swayed gently into their accustomed positions. The engine once again purred like a 20-year-old cat with laryngitis. I sat in stunned silence for almost a minute, checking and double-checking all the easy-to-read vital signs of the car. No oil lights on, no gas light or check engine light. The car was the same as it had been before its sudden failure. I looked over at the old man. His door was now closed, although I hadn't heard it shut or seen him shut it. He had a look on his face which seemed to say, "How about we get a move on now?" His eyes looked impatient, like there was something going on which he was late for and didn't want to miss. I decided to avoid any unpleasantries or awkwardness and just give him the ride into town. I was headed that way anyways. "So, whereabouts you headed?" I asked like the dutiful driver of any hitchhiker is supposed to, at least according to what TV, books, and movies had always taught me. He seemed to consider the question for a moment as I pulled back onto the road and picked up speed. Finally he said, "Just up this road a stretch should be fine. I'll let you know when to toss me out. Thanks again for the ride. I really appreciate it, kid." I hadn't been called kid by anyone in about 10 years, but decided to let it slide without comment. "No problem. I'm headed this way anyway," I said. "And yet you didn't want to stop for us," he said, it without any emphasis or enthusiasm. I wasn't sure what to say back. I thought about just pretending that I hadn't heard him but decided not to, although I did pretend that I hadn't heard him say us. "Yeah, sorry, You know how people are these days. I wasn't sure if you were alright, or I don't know. I mean, who knows? Not that you look like..." I stopped speaking at that point, unsure of how exactly to continue without insulting that he looked like the dirty, crazy old gypsy junkie that I'd originally thought him to be. How nice that would have been. If only he had been an average, everyday lunatic like the rest of us. "Don't worry about it," he said, and I thought I detected a hint of anger in his voice, but maybe it was just impatience. He looked over at the speedometer needle. I was driving roughly the speed limit, maybe more. Who am I kidding? Probably a lot more. I might have been going 90 kilometers an hour. I'm not sure. He put his hand on the dashboard and seemed to caress the dirty thing with his fingertips. Immediately, the car started to accelerate. Even though my foot was not pushing down any harder on the gas, I could feel the pedal falling away from my foot. Instead, as if I had been increasing the speed using the cruise control, but of course I wasn't. So at that point, pretty much any doubt that I had of him being something other than a human being left my mind. I felt a few moments of sheer panic at the thought that this thing beside me was perhaps going to steal my soul, or take me down to hell, or who knows what. Of course, my first thought was to slam on the brake and throw him out, get as far away from him as possible. But how could I? If he had control over my car as much as it seemed, what was the chance of me being able to stop, even if I wanted to? And what if he got upset that I wanted to throw him out? Did I really want to test the patience of this apparently magical being. I decided to just go with it. Sure, I was scared shitless, but what can you do when you're hijacked by a mystical spell-weaving hitchhiker, other than take him to his destination, whatever that might be? Then a new kind of terror struck me. Where on earth, or otherwise, did he want me to take him? He had said, just up this road a stretch. How long was a stretch going to be for this thing? Would I be driving him up some never-ending highway into oblivion for the remainder of my life? But no. The highway was still the same. It was just the same old Highway 6, leading back into town. The houses and trees and fields, which had always been there, were still there. We hadn't been teleported into another dimension without my knowledge. People were still riding tractor lawnmowers around their large country lawns. Dogs were still running playfully through fields as we passed by. A sweaty cyclist battled his way up a steep hill ahead. The world was still slowly turning, as it should have been. Really nice day, isn't it? I asked the question, trying to sound steady and sure of myself, but it came out sounding scared and unsure, like the squeak of a baby squirrel trying to make small talk with a hungry eagle. Fine day, he said, and pulled a dirty brown satchel out from under his seat. I hadn't seen him carrying a bag before that, when he was standing by the side of the road, or when he had gotten into my car, and yet there it was. It was a disgusting looking thing, stained and worn and torn like his clothes. He reached inside and felt his way around, apparently looking for something. As he was feeling around inside the bag, I couldn't help but notice a few strange things. For one, there seemed to be sounds coming from inside the bag. Some were odd enough, like the unmistakable sound of a rattlesnake hissing and shaking its noisy tail. But then there were other noises as well, strange and alien sounds, which were unlike anything I had heard before. Cold and distant noises that somehow sounded alive and in pain. Small, childish voices squealing and screaming, and maybe cursing in foreign tongues, which I had never heard before but sounded almost ancient, like ancient Greek or something. I'm not sure. He reached further into the bag and I saw that he had his arm up in his armpit, despite the fact that the bag was far too shallow to allow for that. Apparently it was a little deeper than it appeared, just looking at him like that. Disappearing into the strange and impossible bag made my head hurt. It didn't make sense, and yet there it was, no more than 2 feet from my face. His head disappeared briefly into the bag, then came back out again, like a magician. Just looking for something, he said as he glanced over at me, and I realized I had been staring. Of course, that made me realize that I hadn't been paying attention to my driving. I looked back out the windshield quickly, expecting to see us heading for a ditch or into an oncoming car, but the car was still in its proper lane, straight as an arrow, rolling its way toward town. There it is, he said, and pulled something out of the bag. He took the colorful little thing and hung it up from my mirror by a string, as if it was an air freshener. It bounced up and down and swayed from its string, and I found my eyes being drawn to it. Despite my newfound remembrance that I was driving, it appeared solid at first, but then began to droop and bloat, like the bubbles inside a lava lamp. Hope you don't mind. It stinks in here a bit, doesn't it? He seemed to be talking from a great distance away. I thought I saw him put his bag back under the seat, but it seemed unimportant now. The colorful, dancing thing hanging from the mirror seemed to be the only thing in the world at that point. I stared as it oscillated and swayed and bounced. It seemed to be speaking to me, almost. Not in words, but speaking nonetheless. As I stared at it for who knows how long, I began to notice that he was right. It did stink in the car. It was a horrible, rancid smell like a sewer mixed with something else, like rotting food and rotting flesh. The colorful, spinning thing hanging from my mirror told me not to mind, to simply stare, and so I did. I stared into the colors and they began to swirl together, forming new colors, ones that I had never seen before. The new colors began to glow and hum and whisper to me. They told me to watch, to listen, to sleep. They assured me I would be fine. The car would drive itself. And so, I did as the colors commanded. At some point after that, I couldn't say how long, the hitchhiker put the bright colored thing back in the bag. My eyes followed it until it was out of sight, and then I snapped back to reality like someone hypnotized. I realized with a bit of uneasiness that I had been drooling, a lot, I wiped the warm liquid off my face and neck with my sleeve and yawned. It felt suddenly like I had been awake for a long time, and yet, at the same time, it seemed like I had just awoken from a long nap. It was a very backwards feeling which I found to be wholly unpleasant. A horrible smell still permeated the car, and seemed to, even intensified. I tried to breathe through my mouth, but the stink still found its way into my head. The hitchhiker seemed not to notice, though. He was still sitting in the passenger seat with his little grin. I looked out the windshield and realized that the thing I had initially feared had happened without me even noticing. We were no longer on the highway, which I recognized and remembered so well. The road we were on now looked nothing like that quaint country drive. For one thing, this highway was a big 4-lane job, like an expressway, except this freeway was empty. There wasn't a pair of headlights or taillights as far as I could see. There were no more farmhouses or fields lining the sides of the road. Instead, all I could see at the sides of the road was blackness stretching out to the horizon. I realized abruptly that the sun had gone down. The sky was dark and starless, and filled with fat purple clouds, which lit up occasionally with loud crashes or distant thunder. I turned my headlights on. The road ahead became brighter, and as soon as it did, I saw the shadowy shapes which were everywhere on the highway. Thousands, maybe millions of them were moving in the same direction as us, at roughly the same speed. The shadowy shapes were somewhat human-looking, at least for the most part. A few looked far from human, though. It was hard to see them clearly. They seemed to waver and shimmer like mirages. I noticed they were all looking back at me, with the glare of my headlights creating an evil shine in their eyes. They stared at me angrily for a moment, until the hitchhiker reached over and turned off my headlights for me. "Keep those off," he said, and I decided to listen. It wasn't like I was driving the car and needed to see where I was going, after all. I looked ahead at the road again and the shadow creatures were gone, disappeared back into the darkness. With no light to illuminate them, they blended back into the utter blackness of the night. I looked far ahead to where we seemed to be going. In the distance, the silhouette of a dark city stood out on the horizon. There were large buildings and skyscrapers, but none had a single light on. The shadowy skyline was barely visible against the dark purple clouds in the sky. The usual glow, which shone into the sky above most cities, was absent here. The city seemed to be draped in darkness. When I looked up, I could see no stars. "Is that where we're going?" I asked the hitchhiker, my voice quavering with nervousness. "That is where we're going," he replied. I sat uncomfortably for a moment before asking, "Is it hell?" "No, hell is one town over." I looked over and he was smiling the same humorless grin that he had been wearing at the side of the road. I wasn't sure if he was joking, but decided not to ask him to clarify. It wasn't much of a stretch to imagine hell being very near to this place of shadowy forms and unholy hitchhikers. I noticed he was looking out his window and shaking his head, as if even he were astonished. He looked straight ahead again and said, "There sure is a lot of them this time around." "What are you all doing here? Why am I here? I don't belong in this place." The words came out almost involuntarily. He was silent for a little while, and I thought he wouldn't answer, but then he said, "I needed you to take me here. You can go once I reach my destination." "How am I going to get back? I don't have the slightest clue how we even got here." I couldn't help but wonder if maybe he had overlooked that aspect of the journey. After all, he wouldn't be around to hang the colorful air freshener up again. "Once you drop me off, head back the way we came. When you see the lights, head toward them. Look into them. Listen to them. They will tell you where to go." That sounds a little fucked up. I couldn't help but sound skeptical. "Well, either that or you can stay in the city with us," he said. And as he smiled broadly, his teeth suddenly looked very long and sharp. "Or I could let you see inside my bag for a little while." He began to reach under his seat. No, that's alright. I'll take my chances with the lights." "As you wish," he said, no longer smiling quite as broadly. We sat and drove in silence for a while as the city grew larger and got closer. I began to feel dwarfed and small as we approached the buildings, and I realized that they were much bigger than even those of New York or Toronto. By the time we were entering the giant city, I couldn't even see the tops of most of the buildings anymore. They seemed to just fade away into the fog of the clouds. As we rolled further into the black city, the highway turned into Main Street. I could faintly see the shadow things moving along the sides of the road. Some huddled together in groups, but mostly they walked alone. Many of them turned to look at my car drive by, but then quickly went back to what they were doing. The closer we got to the center of the city, the worse the smell in the car became. I had already put my shirt over my nose to try to block some of the stink, but now even that was becoming futile. I began to feel like I might pass out as every breath I took seemed worse than the last. "You don't want to do that," the hitchhiker said from beside me, as if he had read my mind. "You don't want to fall asleep here. You'd be better off in my bag of tricks." He looked at me like maybe I should reconsider his offer to get thrown into his bag of screaming horrors. "I'll be fine," I said, hoping that I meant it. A few moments later, he was giving me terse directions, saying left or right, and pointing hastily, and I had thought that he was in control of the car. I began to wonder if maybe it was all in my head, if maybe I could easily turn right then and head back the way I had come. Either way, I decided I would need to get rid of the hitchhiker first. Might as well take him all the way. As we got further into the shadow city, the hitchhiker seemed to sink into deep thought. He cupped his chin with his right hand and rubbed at his whiskers thoughtfully. He began to make little pondering noises like, and uh-huh. I considered asking him what was on his mind, but then decided that I probably didn't want to know. A little while later, the hitchhiker told me to stop and pull over to the side of the dark road. I did as he asked and pulled over in front of a very large building. The shadow things were milling around outside like patrons lined up for a busy nightclub. A few of them wandering over to my car and gawking inside, trying to get a glimpse at us. They pressed their dark faces up against the glass of the windows and stared at us, all the while making strange whispering noises. Well, this is it. The hitchhiker reached under his seat and pulled out his bag. I wanted to say something along the lines of, "Goodbye," or "Get the fuck out of my car now, please," but couldn't quite find my voice. I managed a very feeble wave instead. He seemed still to be deep in thought as he reached for the door handle. He grasped it for a moment, then took his hand away. "You know," he said, "on second thought, I hope you don't mind terribly, but I think I will keep you after all. It's so hard to find a ride sometimes. I'm just so sick of hitching." It took me a moment to figure out exactly what he meant, but when he started opening his bag up again, it became clear that he meant to throw me in there. Somehow, I would fit. I would live the remainder of my life as a prisoner in his little canvas bag with no bottom. I would become one of the wretched, wailing voices screaming for freedom from the depths of this demon's travel bag. And I heard those voices getting closer as he held the opening of the bag up to my face. I felt myself being sucked into it, stretched out like an unlucky astronaut falling into a black hole. For a horrible instant, my face was inside the bag and I could feel my neck and body following slowly after. Inside was darkness. But the darkness was hot and sticky and oppressing. From everywhere came painful wails and agonizing screams. It sounded like 1,000 individual voices, all begging and pleading to be allowed to die. If not for one of those voices, I would have joined them. One voice rose up clearly from the dark fog and managed a raspy, parched-sounding run. I yanked my head out of the bag painfully. The hitchhiker looked at me impatiently. His eyes began to dance and shimmer, and he held the opening of the bag over my head. As he lowered it, I tried not to look into his eyes. I tried to find the door handle. He began to speak in a low rumble, mumbling ancient-sounding incantations under his breath. The more he spoke, the more I wanted to be inside his little satchel. It began to seem like a very inviting and pleasant place. The wailing and moaning and screaming from the bag was still audible as he began to lower it over my head, but it seemed far away and unimportant now. My fingers found the door handle at this point, and it took me a moment to remember why my hand had been searching for it. "Pull," the voice inside the bag screamed. "Pull and run." I pulled the door handle and catapulted out of the car. I ran without looking back. I ran through the dark streets of the city, the shadow things watching me go. I let my sense of direction lead me back the way we had come, hoping that my memory would find my way out. My feet pounded the road beneath me, with eventually decreasing force. Still, I ran faster and longer than I ever had in my life. I ran until my head hurt, and my heart felt like it was going to beat right out of my chest. I ran until my throat stung and my legs were like dead wood. The air started to stink less and less as I got further from the hitchhiker. Still, felt like I was running a marathon through the smoggiest, smelliest city on Earth. I didn't really think I was on Earth anymore though, somehow. As I got closer to the edge of the city, the shadow things began to approach me more candidly. They got right up to me and spoke their strange, mumbly language in my ear. They tried to pull me and tug my arm, urging me to go with them, but their black tendril arms slipped and passed through me like smoke. When they noticed this, they would leave me alone suddenly and disappear down the streets into the darkness of the city. Finally, I found the wide highway leading back home. I ran down it and watched over my shoulder as the vast city got smaller. It took a while, but about half an hour, it was beginning to fade into the distance enough for me to feel somewhat comfortable walking. I was still scared enough that I wanted to keep running, but my heart and legs and throat said no. I kept picturing the hitchhiker speeding up the street toward me in my car, laughing maniacally, ready to run me down or capture me. I put my hands on top of my head to try and alleviate the pain of a bad stomach cramp and walked along the shoulder of the strange highway. I tried not to think about the fact that I would probably never see my little shitbox car ever again. It was unreliable, yeah, but it was my car. There was no way in hell I would be going back for it, though. After a while, I began to see what I thought were stars appearing in the sky. They shimmered and twinkled, and began to illuminate the road where I walked. The more I looked at them, the more they looked like the colorful thing the hitchhiker had shown me. They danced and swirled and floated around like fireflies. The colors of them swirled together to make new colors, and they began to whisper. I kept walking and watching them, and the lights got bigger and bigger until they covered my whole vision. The colors blended and bled. The whispering got louder and louder. Finally, I could no longer walk. I sat down cross-legged on the side of the road and just watched the lights. All the strength seemed to be gone from my legs. As I sat there and watched, I fell asleep and awake at the same time. The lights whispered not to worry, that everything would be okay. All I had to do was give myself over to them. I listened and obliged, and felt a passing over back into our world. The light which flooded my vision quickly became blue, and I realized it was the sky. I was lying on my back on the gravel shoulder of Highway 6. The sharp stones cut into my back, so I sat up. I looked down at myself and saw that I was covered in brown dust. A car sped by going well over 100 and honked his horn at me angrily. Someone yelled something out the window that I couldn't quite catch. Usually, that might have aggravated me a bit, especially with the long walk I apparently had ahead of me, but not that day. I was so glad to hear the voice of another person and be back to this beautiful reality that I kissed the dirty gravel shoulder of the road, not even wincing when I noticed a dead and mangled roadkill possum not 3 feet away. I got up and walked over to the grass beside the road and lay down in it and rolled around like a puppy. I hugged the ground, thinking again on the inside of that dark bag and all the voices which occupied it. That could have been me for the remainder of my existence, I thought to myself. And who knows how long that might have been. I remember the ancient sounding tongues which had risen up from the bottom of the bag. Those voices had sounded the most viciously angry, the most insane. I got the feeling that being inside that bag extended one's life, probably indefinitely. The thought made me cringe. I felt a horrible guilt that I hadn't been able to help those poor lost souls. They had helped me. I tried not to think of an eternity living in the bottom of that dirty and waterless satchel, but it was impossible not to. I got up from the grass, walked back to the road. It was a quiet day on the little highway. There hadn't been another car since the one that had driven by and yelled at me. Then, a few moments later, a car appeared over the crest of a hill, heading my way. It twinkled and shone white in the sun. The hum of the engine and the sound of the tires on the road got louder as it approached. I brushed the dirt from my clothes as best as I could and stuck out my thumb.